Hey, hey, how's it going, folks? I'm going to talk today about The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles. So it seems fitting that I come on camera and create something new, plug into the universe or the muse or God or whatever you choose to call it, because that's what this book is about. This is the second time I've read this. I literally just finished it half an hour ago for the second time, and I was like, boy, I should come on and talk about it straight away because it just hits home. It hits me right here, you know. So it's a short book. It won't take you long to get through. 165 pages, and not all the pages are full. So you'll get through it fast. What I like to do is have it on the desk and just dip into it and read one or two entries and take it on board. I have a lot of highlights, but I'm only going to focus on a few, particularly towards the end. But there's one really that stood out to me as a great illustration of what this book is about, and it refers to a quotation from Somerset Maugham. And he says, someone once asked Somerset Maugham if he wrote on a schedule or only when struck by inspiration. I write only when inspiration strikes, he replied. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. So, anyone on Booktube will know that creating videos is, it's not easy. You have to set stuff up. You have to think about what you're going to say or not, as the case may be. You've got to come on camera and talk about something, creating something that didn't exist before. And the same goes for music, for art, for writing, any kind of creative pursuit. It requires you to connect to the muse, to the universe, and resistance gets in the way. And that creativity doesn't have to be an artistic endeavour. It can be any kind of creative pursuit. This is something that Rubin talks about in his amazing book, The Creative Act. And while I'm talking of Rubin, there is a really, really good interview on his podcast channel where he sits down with Steven Pressfield and they talk together about this topic. And it's just like, as if it was made just for me. So that idea of waiting for inspiration to strike versus just sitting down and doing the work, I struggle with that all the time. I'll make this video tomorrow when I've got this prepared and I've got that ready. And like tonight, before I sat down, I had to wait for the dog to come in because she was outside and she would bark halfway through the video. And so I thought, I'll just wait. And then something else could happen and something else, which is insane. Now, the other thing about it is that for me personally, I find that the creative act, connecting to something bigger, is one of the most beneficial things I can do for my mental health. This is why I find my journaling habit to be so important, where I sit down in the mornings with, of course I'm using a different mic now, so I can't lean forward, with my journal. So I love fountain pens, and I sit down and write pages in this beautiful regalia notebook, and then I put them online because I think that helps me to do the thing, and I want it to be an example of how the process is so helpful to me with my mental health and with my recovery as well. If you don't know, I'm in recovery from alcoholism, so I got there through AA for the most part, but it was through that program that I learned about the concept of the higher power and how to use that as a tool for serenity and sobriety. that's a different topic. If you want to learn more about that, I do have another YouTube channel where I've spoken about that at length. But they go together, these ideas of higher power, creativity, sobriety, recovery, mental health, positive mental health. And resistance is something that comes up a lot in my life, and I didn't really understand it all that well until I read Steven Pressfield's book, Procrastination being probably the biggest symptom of that, where I feel like I'll do anything to avoid doing the thing that I've decided I want to do or the thing that I know is good for me. And he gives it a capital letter, resistance. And I found that helpful at first, and now I'm starting to wonder whether giving it a capital letter actually gives it power and makes it real, where I feel like it's the kind of thing that if you were to take away its power by not acknowledging that it's real, then it would cease to become, it would cease to be, because it isn't actually real, is it? It's not something you can touch or feel or see. It's a psychological block. And if you give it, if you personify it, if you turn it into something that's manifest, then it gives it a certain amount of power. So this is just me riffing, plugging in and talking about what comes up and what my thoughts have been as I go through this, which I suppose is what a review is, isn't it? So I'm not sure whether when it comes up in my journal pages, whether I ought to be giving it a capital letter as a proper noun, because, that gives it power. So I do like that Somerset Maugham quote, though, about sitting down to do the work at a time. And this is where systems can be so helpful. I do use a system. It's Notion-based, based on August Bradley's Pillars, Pipelines and Vaults, which is like a to-do list on steroids, project management software. And that can be helpful sometimes if I break down my projects into bite-sized chunks and then enjoy the dopamine hit of ticking the box, But all too often I find myself sitting down and just moving stuff to the next date, because I haven't done it. So it doesn't always work, but, So let's have a look at some quotations. Right, we've read Somerset Maugham. This is one where I ended up writing quite a lot of stuff on the page at the end of it. And it's to do with resistance and the ego. So he says, the instinct that pulls us toward art is the impulse to evolve, to learn, to heighten and elevate our consciousness. So I believe that. That's kind of what I've been saying about the creative act being divine. That's how I would put it. And then he says, such evolution is life-threatening to the ego, again with a capital letter. It reacts accordingly. It summons its cunning, marshals its troops. The ego produces resistance and attacks the awakening artist. So he's saying, I think, that the ego doesn't want us to evolve. The ego's primary purpose is self-preservation, and it sees any kind of spiritual evolution as being a threat. That's how I read that. So at the end of that I've written, so it's a war. Is ego trying to thwart my goals, dreams and aspirations? The author calls it a fight. Think of the term ego death. I forget where I came across that, but the author says we couldn't last a day without it. Talking of ego, so we do need that for survival. So we don't want to kill it, just put it in its place. Quotation marks, the ego produces resistance. I wonder now about executive function in ADHD. Is that an ego thing? What can I do about it? I suppose this is why meditation is so powerful and, quote, a clean way to reset. Haven't I always used the word reset? A drinking binge was a reset. which it was. I used to find myself, before the drinking got way out of control, the day after a night out, I might feel that I had reset, that having a night out and a good time helped me to forget about my troubles. But then I would take it too far, kick the arse out of it, and we won't go into that. But also reading. I always used to find reading a reset, and I used to think of it in terms of what I would call the good place. If I was having a difficult day, I could settle down with a fantasy book, and after a chapter or two, I would find myself having reset and come back into a good place where my perspectives were back to being in a reasonable plane rather than freaking out about things that weren't real. So, reset, yeah. And I find the same thing with the creative act. When I've finished recording this, I'm probably going to feel a lot better than I did before I sat down to make this. And I wasn't feeling bad then, so that's interesting. When I do feel bad, it's very hard to sit down and write or make a video or really sometimes to do anything, even read. That can be challenging. Music is another reset for me sometimes. When it gets too bad though, sleep I think is the only thing that I use. Anyway, so that was really a food for thought chapter, and it's called Experiencing the Self, if you have the book and you want to look it up. So let's move on to another concept that he discusses towards the end, which is to do with hierarchy and the definition of a hack. And that means that if you are producing creative work in order to satisfy your perceived audience, and only for that, or for money, that's another example, then that's hierarchical, and it's not really plugging into the higher power. And he breaks it down into those two things. So here we talk about the territorial orientation, which is the other kind, is when you feel a burning desire to create something without even really knowing where you're going to put it or what you're going to do with it. It's the idea that if the world were to be about to end and you were the last person on earth, would you still do the thing? That is the question to ask yourself. If the answer is yes, then that means it's territorial, not hierarchical. In other words, you're doing it for yourself, not to please someone else. So, and that leads into fear of judgment, doesn't it? If you're making content and putting it out there, but you're really worried about how people are going to receive it, that can paralyse you as an artist. That's resistance, that's the ego. That's what this book is about, learning how to get round that and take away its power and be creative when you feel like being creative, plugging in. And sometimes picking up a pen or turning on a camera, for me, I don't tend to plan my videos, you might have noticed. I like to turn on the camera and just see what comes out. And is it going to be good? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It might be, it might not. Who am I to say? If at the end of what I make I feel better, then it was good. Whether or not anyone else enjoys it is besides the point. We create art for ourselves, fundamentally, in order to discover ourselves, not just because, it scratches an itch. It's a process of discovery. And of course you can plan and you can make your art better. And for a lot of people who, a lot of really well edited videos that you see on YouTube, for example, that have been well planned and edited really well and are made by experienced people, they can be even more entertaining and fun to watch. I'm not saying that that's not an artistic thing, because it is. Video editing, that's an artistic pursuit. So is editing books. So is cooking. We could go on and on and on. There are so many creative pursuits. kind of lost the train of thought there. But yeah, the idea of territorial orientation. So he discusses the idea of Stevie Wonder, his territory is the piano. Arnold Schwarzenegger, his territory is the gym. And he goes on to say that if the world were about to end, would Arnie still go to the gym? He probably would, wouldn't he? What's your territory? So he asks that question. And I think for me, I had two things that came to mind. One was music, so playing guitar in particular. I've been playing acoustic guitar for 30 years, something like that. And I'm good at it. And it's always been a creative endeavour, but it's also been something for which I get paid, which is a nice position to be in, but it's also something that causes me great anxiety. And at the moment, since my local restaurant where I played closed down and my band split up because the rest of the band moved away, I haven't really been out much at all. And I think it's resistance and ego and all of that got in the way of that. And so I stopped performing. I'm not saying I'm never going to get back to it. I'd like to think that one day I will. But at the moment, it's not happening. So there's one thing, my territory, acoustic guitar, which I'm not spending much time in. The other one is Freemasonry. I've also been a member of Freemasonry since about the same time as I picked up the guitar, actually. Same length of time. And right now, I'm the master of my local lodge, which is a position of privilege. It's a position of leadership, and it can make me feel like an imposter in a lot of ways. There's a performance side to it, as well as a leadership role, but it's largely performative. Public speaking and putting on little dramas. That's kind of how to sum it up. So that's something that I find really good for personal growth. It's also something that involves a lot of socialising, which doesn't come easily to me. I'm very introverted, so social situations for me are draining, but they're also good for me, rather than sitting in the house all the time, which would be my preference. I'm actually out there and talking to people and being kind to people, being kind to myself, and then allowing myself to come home and recharge, giving myself time to do that. And I'm finding the relationships that I'm building up through that are really rewarding. So that's one of my territories, I would say. So that's what I got from the end of the book. And then this last quotation here where I've highlighted it because I like to go swimming. And he said that the swimmer who towels off after finishing her laps feels a hell of a lot better than the tired, cranky person who dove into the pool 30 minutes earlier. And that is absolutely the case. And yet still, when my alarm goes off and it's time to go to the pool, I quite often find myself hitting snooze and now and then not going. What's that all about? It's mental, isn't it? The artist and the mother are vehicles, not originators. They don't create the new life, they only bear it. So as an artist, you're connecting to a higher power and seeing what comes out. You are the channel, the conduit. When the artist works territorially, she reveres heaven. She aligns herself with the mysterious forces that power the universe and that seek, through her, to bring forth new life. By doing her work for its own sake, she sets herself at the service of these forces. It's good, isn't it? It's good stuff. Then it talks of the test where if you were the last person on earth, would you still do it? The fruits of our labour come from heaven. Why not give back? The enemy of the artist is the small-time ego, which begets resistance, which is the dragon that guards the gold. So, I think you get the idea. It will make you think if you are at all involved in any kind of creative pursuit, or if you're not and you want to be, and you're getting in your own way, this book may very well be the thing that you need to help you through that. So I've given it 5 stars. You won't be surprised to learn. And it's a book that I can see myself buying as a gift for people as well, because it's just that helpful. Thanks for watching. See you later.